In this video, I'm going to cover the remaining two puzzles from the paper on denoting, articulated by British Cambridge philosopher Bertrand. In our last video, I have demonstrated the first puzzle that Russell has posed as a reaction of the assimilation between proper name and definite descriptive phrases. So let's begin the second puzzle without further ado. Russell described the second puzzle and enables his reader to understand the riddle with the help of an empty definite descriptive phrase. Particularly, he chooses the example, the present king of France, quote unquote, the present king of France. The Russell specially picked out this particular definite descriptive phrase, empty definite description. Empty definite description or empty denoting phrase, whatever you say, applies to such situation where it describes an individual or thing which refers to a null class or empty class. Okay, so in that case, or to put it differently, there is a reference failure because it fails to refer to anything. However, sentences containing such empty denoting phrases are still meaningful in spite of their lack of success in referring to something. Alright, so let's explain the puzzle with the help of an example from the paper on denoting. Before we jump into the example, we know that in logic there is one of the laws of thought called law of excluded middle. The law of excluded middle can be stated thus: either a proposition or its negation must be true. So in the case of the proposition, the present king of France, that Russell is particularly mentioning in his paper on denoting, the present king of France is bold. So in that case, either the proposition, the present king of France is bold, or its negation, the present king of France is not bold, must be true. Either of these propositions must be true. Now, if we make two lists, one of bold and non-bold persons, and look for the person denoted by the description, the present king of France, we do not find the person denoted by the phrase in either list. We are making a list of bold person and non-bold person, and then we go on look for the person denoted by the description, the present king of France, but we do not find the present king of France in either list. Thus, what it is doing, it is just violating the law of excluded middle, and the violation of law of thought cannot be acceptable to a logician like Bertrand Russell. So Russell identified this puzzle. Now this is what is called the puzzle law of excluded middle. Now let's move on to the next puzzle that Russell is encountering in relation to definite description, a particular type of definite description. So the next puzzle, the third puzzle, is created prima facie from the difficulty of apparent reference to non-existence. That is why it is known as problem of negative existentials. Okay, and Russell poses this puzzle in a question form, and the question goes as: how can a non-entity be the subject of a proposition? How can a non-entity be the subject of a proposition? As we are talking about negative existentials, the emphasis, if you notice, is on the negative part, negative existential, and the problem is pinpointing the problem, Russell is posing the question, how can a non-entity be the subject of a proposition? Because in our everyday talk, we keep on using descriptive phrases, definite descriptive phrases that deny the existence of the referent. Okay, so now let's explain it with the help of an example that has been given by Russell. He takes an example that A differs from B. A differs from B. This is the particular example that Russell takes in his paper so as to describe the third puzzle. A differs from B. Okay. So now if we assume this proposition to be true, now the difference between A and B indeed subsists. Till now there is no problem, but if the difference does not exist, if the proposition is false, then in the case of the falsity of the proposition, no such difference between A and B subsist. Thus there arises a problem. There arises a problem. The problem is, how can a non-entity be the subject of a proposition? Let's reiterate the problem. Russell is concerned about negative existentials, apparent reference to non-existence. Okay, how can a non-entity be the subject of a proposition? For example, the difference between A and B does not exist. The difference between A and B does not exist. So the apparent reference of the difference between A and B, again in the predicate it is being claimed that does not exist. So it seems pretty contradictory. Alright, and that is why Russell is posing the puzzle in a question form. How can a non-entity be the subject of a proposition? Okay, and again the problem has been restated as we proceed in the course of our discussion. So now you keep following what I am saying. Russell says, how can a non-entity be the subject of a proposition? Because why all these are creating problem for Russell? Remember, Russell was a hardcore realist. Okay, but that is why for Russell to admit such entity denoted by empty definite descriptions creating problem, because Russell was a hardcore realist. If you go through the paper, you will encounter a sentence beginning with the robust sense of reality. Robust sense of reality enabled Russell to do etc. etc. So realism, robust sense of reality, hardcore realist, like all these are adjective of Russell, attributed to Russell. So Russell being a hardcore realist, for him it is very difficult to deal with the sentences having the sentences containing a subject that is a null class, empty class. So now this but may not be a problem for philosophers such as Alexius Meinong. You may have heard of Alexius Meinong. He was an Austrian philosopher, and Alexius Meinong's theory of object admits of Russellian non-existent object. Actually, Alexius Meinong, he advocated such a theory of object that admit Russell's non-existent object, because his ontology, his account of ontology is quite different from Russell's ontology. He subscribes to such an ontology that is pretty different from Russell's ontology. And he made a distinction. I'm talking about Meinong. Alexius Meinong made a distinction between being of an object and an object's existence. making this distinction, he keep on liberally adding on new kind of objects in his ontology. What Meinong meant by being of an object, yeah, he is making a distinction between being of an object, and object's existence. Okay, so he meant by the phrase being of an object such things that do not really exist in reality but still subsist as an object of our thought. We can talk about them, but still they do not exist in reality. They subsist. He is using the verb subsist rather instead of exist. How they are subsisting? They are subsisting as an object of our thought. So his ontology accommodates a large number of objects, and he is very free to add on different types of objects, although it is non-existent, although it does not have any proper, any reality, any real existence in out there. So he is very liberal so far as his ontology is concerned. I'm talking about Alexius Meinong and contrasting his ontology to that of Russell's. So now Alexius Meinong's ontology is pretty different from Russell's ontology, and Alexius Meinong is accepting such type of objects that we can talk about, but still they do not exist, but still subsist as an object of our thought. That is why for Meinong there is a room for objects like Pegasus, round square, and Golden Mountain, the present King of France, and so on, in his ontology in a different way, as objects that subsist as an object of our thought, although they do not really exist out there in reality. But Russell's point of view is extremely different from Meinong's ontology. Russell eliminates. He put to an end the unnecessary objects. He shaves off, with the help of Occam's razor, all the unnecessary objects from his ontology. Okay. And the problem that he has posed before we begin our discussion, that how can anonymity be the subject of a proposition? These keep on bothering Russell, and for him it was a puzzle, and he was convinced that his theory was able to solve this problem. Theory of descriptions is actually a solution to this problem. And he again restated the problem thus, that it must always be self-contradictory to deny the being of anything. As we mentioned, the difference between A and B does not subsist. It does not exist or subsist, whatever. The difference between A and B. So the proposition that Russell is mentioning in his paper on denoting the difference between A and B does not exist. So it must be always self-contradictory to deny the being of anything. The subject is actually postulating the existence of the difference between A and B, and in the predicate the difference is being negated. So it is contradictory. Okay, matter of full contradiction, absolute contradiction, that how can it must be a contradictory to deny the being of anything. On the one hand, the subject is admitting the reference to the non-existence. Okay. Now I hope that I'm able to convey you the puzzles. So the first puzzle, to sum up again our discussion, the first puzzle that Russell was exhibiting, that the puzzle arises out of empty descriptive phrases when we are assimilating it with proper names, it gives birth to a puzzle called law of excluded middle. Law of excluded middle, it suggests that either a proposition or its negation must be true. But we have seen that in the case of the particular example, the present king of France is bald, this law of excluded middle is being violated, and this has created a problem that Russell calls puzzle. This is all about the first puzzle. And the second puzzle is about yes, the self-contradictory. It must be self-contradictory, always self-contradictory to deny the being of anything. We are accepting the being in the subject, that the golden mountain does not exist. If you take the example, the golden mountain does not exist. So the whole proposition is actually denial of the subject. The golden mountain does not exist. How can a non-entity be the subject of a proposition? We are denying the existence of golden mountain, but still we are postulating it initially at the subject. So this is a matter of contradiction. All right. So these are the two puzzles, and first puzzle that we have discussed in our preceding video. So Russell, having said this, Russell holds that the relation of meaning with the denotative expressions is indeed curious. Any theory which fails to admit this fact is destined to be inadequate. This is the opinion of Russell. Now, that Russell has identified these problems, Russell must be credited to identify these problems, and he needs to propound such a theory that will enable us to solve all these problems, and he believed that his theory of descriptions was an endeavor towards this direction. With this, I'm going to conclude my video.